In the quiet town of Dunbar, secrets lingered under the surface, known only to those who dared to look. Evelyn Barnes, an investigative journalist and mother of two, had heard whispers of a powerful group in town, a shadowy organization rumored to pull strings from the background. It was a society that few could name, and even fewer dared to discuss openly, the Illuminati. Evelyn was a respected journalist, her career built on exposing truths no one else had the courage to pursue. When she received an anonymous tip claiming to have information on the Illuminati's activities in her own town, curiosity overtook her better judgment. The caller insisted on meeting her late one evening in the old Holloway cemetery on the outskirts of town. It was an odd request, but Evelyn was no stranger to cryptic sources, and the tip had sparked her interest in the otherwise sleepy Dunbar. If there were a story here, she intended to find it. As dusk fell, Evelyn parked her car by the entrance of the cemetery, hesitating only briefly before stepping into the shadowed rows of stone. Fog clung low to the ground, weaving between the headstones and adding an eerie stillness to the air. The silence was heavy, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. "Miss Barnes," a voice murmured from the shadows. She turned, squinting in the dim light, until she made out the figure of an elderly man. His eyes darted around as if he feared someone, or something, might be listening. "I don't have much time," he said, his voice trembling. "They're watching. They're always watching." Evelyn's pulse quickened. "You're safe here. Tell me everything." The man held out a bundle of old, faded documents. "These are the names, their meetings, their rituals. It's all here. But remember, once you see this, there's no turning back." Evelyn took the papers, the weight of his words settling heavily on her shoulders. But before she could ask any more questions, a distant sound, almost like a low hum, vibrated through the air. The man's face turned white with fear. "They're here," he whispered, and without another word, he bolted, disappearing into the night. Evelyn was left alone, clutching the documents. The cemetery grew colder, the quiet around her pressing in with an almost unnatural intensity. Heart racing, she shoved the papers into her bag and hurried back to her car. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn's life took a drastic turn. The documents she'd received detailed a series of clandestine gatherings and rituals that painted a disturbing picture. Some pages described powerful members within Dunbar's local government. Others spoke of symbols and incantations to bind power and influence. As Evelyn sifted through the information, a nagging sensation began gnawing at her. The more she uncovered, the more she felt like someone, or something, was watching her. One night, as she worked late in her dimly lit office, she heard a subtle tapping on her window. Startled, Evelyn looked up, only to see nothing outside but the night. She brushed it off as the wind, but the sound returned, steady and deliberate. Her skin prickled with unease. Slowly, she approached the window and pulled the curtain back, but there was no one there. Just as she turned to return to her desk, a fleeting shadow passed by the window, stopping her in her tracks. It was there, then gone, but she could have sworn she saw a figure, standing just beyond the edge of the light. Breathing heavily, she locked the window and returned to her desk, deciding it was time to leave. She packed up her notes, feeling a growing sense of urgency to get home. Yet, as she turned off her desk light and stepped outside, she noticed a sleek black car parked across the street, engine idling but lights off. Evelyn swallowed hard, her mind racing back to the warnings from the man in the cemetery. She hurried to her own car, looking over her shoulder as she drove away, but the dark car followed her at a distance, maintaining its distance yet staying close enough to ensure she knew it was there. As the days passed, Evelyn tried to shake off the feeling that she was being followed, but the black car was becoming a regular part of her routine. She started to see it in her rearview mirror wherever she went, the grocery store, her children's school, even when she took evening walks to clear her mind. Paranoia settled in, and Evelyn found herself constantly checking over her shoulder, wondering how deep this conspiracy truly ran. She confided in her husband, Mark, sharing everything she'd discovered and the disturbing presence of the black car. His face grew serious, and he took her hands in his. "Maybe it's time to let this one go, Evelyn," he urged gently. "This isn't just another story. If these people are who you think they are, they have power far beyond what we can understand." But Evelyn was resolute. She felt a responsibility to reveal the truth, regardless of the risks. She continued to dig deeper, pulling together a compelling expose. On the night she completed her draft, she printed the documents, ready to take them to her editor the next morning. But as she stood by the printer, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. Reluctantly, she answered. "Miss Barnes," a calm, chilling voice said, "we'd advise you to reconsider your next article." Evelyn's blood ran cold. "Who is this? Consider this your final warning." The line went dead. She was shaken but undeterred. The town deserved to know the truth, and she couldn't live with herself if she backed down now. The next morning, Evelyn awoke early, anxious to hand over the story. But as she stepped outside, her heart plummeted. Her car tires were slashed, all four of them. She ran back inside, grabbing her laptop and printouts, deciding to walk to the office instead. But as she neared the end of her street, a group of men in dark suits blocked her path. One of them stepped forward, expressionless. "Miss Barnes, we won't ask again. Stop what you're doing. For your sake, and your family's." Fear rooted her in place, but she gathered her courage, glaring at him. "You can't stop the truth," the man smirked. "You'd be surprised." As he turned to leave, he muttered something in a language she didn't recognize. She felt a strange pressure in her chest, almost like a curse wrapping itself around her. That night, her children woke up screaming, claiming they'd seen shadowy figures lurking in the corners of their rooms. Evelyn's resolve began to waver. The fear had seeped into her home, into her children's lives. She watched them sleep that night, wondering if she was making the right choice. She'd never backed down before, but this was different. This was darkness that threatened everything she loved. The following morning, she made the call to her editor, voice trembling as she said, "I can't do this story. I'm sorry." Her editor was stunned, but she didn't offer an explanation. She spent the rest of the day erasing every trace of the investigation, shredding documents, deleting files. She wanted no remnants of the secret she had unearthed. The black car disappeared after that. The strange calls ceased, and the shadowy figures no longer haunted her family's nights. Life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be with the weight of that knowledge resting heavy on her shoulders. Evelyn never spoke of the Illuminati again, but the memory lingered, a reminder of a truth she could never reveal. In Dunbar, the shadows remained. I had never thought much about conspiracy theories. Sure, I'd read the occasional article about shadowy organizations running the world, but it all seemed too outlandish to believe. That was until last year, when I accepted an invitation to attend a lavish weekend party hosted by my company's CEO. In hindsight, I wish I'd stayed far, far away. It all started with a formal black envelope, hand-delivered to my desk. Inside was an invitation to the most exclusive retreat our company offered, hosted by Mr. Goldwyn himself, the founder of Titan Enterprises. Goldwyn wasn't just rich, he was a legend. People claimed he had ties to royalty, to old money, even to otherworldly powers. Most laughed at the rumors, but there was something in his eyes, something that spoke of secrets too heavy to share. The invitation was simple, a weekend of relaxation and networking at his mansion deep in the hills of Vermont. Most people would have given anything for the opportunity, but something felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into a place where I didn't belong. Still, I convinced myself it was just nerves and packed my bags. The drive was long and winding, leading me through thick forests and isolated roads. The mansion was more of a fortress than a house, its towering walls hidden behind iron gates and high trees. At the gates, a guard dressed in an all-black uniform with a symbol I didn't recognize checked my invitation. With a nod, he let me through, and I felt a chill run down my spine as I passed into the grounds. Inside, the mansion was breathtaking, with vaulted ceilings, intricate carvings, and a grandeur that felt almost otherworldly. The guests were mingling, sipping on champagne and dressed in formal attire that seemed more fitting for a royal ball than a work retreat. I recognized a few faces, executives, CEOs, influential figures from other companies, all of whom seemed just as out of place as I felt. That evening, as we sat down to a grand feast, Goldwyn himself appeared. His presence was commanding, and his gaze lingered on each of us just long enough to send a shiver down our spines. When he spoke, his voice was smooth and powerful. "Tonight, you are all here not just as my guests, but as chosen ones. Few are invited to this gathering, and fewer still have the chance to join something much greater." There was a murmur of excitement and confusion among the guests, but Goldwyn continued, ignoring the whispers. "Tonight, we will initiate a select few into a world of power beyond your imagination. Those who are worthy will know wealth, influence, and knowledge that most only dream of." His eyes gleamed with a strange light, and I felt a knot of fear tighten in my stomach. As the night went on, I tried to mingle, to act normal, but the atmosphere was growing increasingly tense. People whispered in corners, casting glances at one another, and the staff seemed almost robotic, their faces emotionless and their movements precise. I started to feel like I was being watched, and when I looked up, I caught Mr. Goldwyn's gaze from across the room. He smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was cold, calculating. After dinner, we were escorted into a large room lined with stone walls and adorned with symbols that looked ancient and arcane. In the center of the room was a massive wooden table with strange carvings, surrounded by candles that cast eerie shadows. Goldwyn stepped into the center of the room, his expression serious. "Tonight, we hold a ceremony," he said, his voice low and almost hypnotic. "A ritual that has been passed down through generations, a pact that binds us to knowledge and power beyond this world." He gestured, and a few people in hooded robes entered the room, each carrying a strange object, an old book, a silver chalice, and a dagger that gleamed under the candlelight. The room fell silent, and I felt my heart racing. I wanted to leave, to get out of that mansion and never look back, but something held me there, a strange compulsion that I couldn't shake. Goldwyn began to speak in a language I didn't recognize, his voice rising and falling in a rhythm that seemed to echo through my very bones. The guests around me seemed entranced, their eyes glazed over as they listened. Then, one by one, people were called to the center of the room. They were asked a question in that strange language, and if they responded correctly, they were handed the chalice to drink from. When it was my turn, I felt a wave of fear wash over me, but I forced myself to step forward. Goldwyn looked at me, his eyes piercing. He spoke the question, and though I didn't understand the words, I felt compelled to answer, to speak words that felt ancient and forbidden. As I spoke, Goldwyn's smile widened, and he handed me the chalice. The liquid inside was thick and bitter, but I swallowed it, feeling a strange warmth spread through me. Goldwyn nodded approvingly, and I was allowed to return to my seat. I felt different, as if something had awakened within me, something dark and powerful. The ceremony continued, but things began to blur, the faces around me becoming distorted, the candles flickering with shadows that seemed to take on a life of their own. I could hear whispers, voices calling my name, urging me to go deeper, to surrender to the darkness. When I finally came to, I was lying in my bed in one of the mansion's guest rooms, my head pounding and my body aching. I couldn't remember how I got there, but flashes of the night before haunted me, Goldwyn's face, the chalice, the strange language. I stumbled to the bathroom, splashing water on my face, but the reflection that stared back at me wasn't quite my own. My eyes were darker, my skin paler, and there was a strange mark on my wrist, a symbol that matched the carvings in the ceremony room. Panic set in, and I quickly packed my things, desperate to leave. But when I reached the front door, I found it locked, the guard from before blocking my way. "You can't leave," he said, his voice emotionless. "Not until the ritual is complete." I was trapped. The mansion that had once seemed grand and luxurious now felt like a prison, and everywhere I turned, I saw the hooded figures watching me, their eyes cold and unfeeling. Over the next few days, I tried to escape, to find a way out, but every attempt was thwarted, and the guests, who had once seemed normal now acted like members of a cult, their expressions vacant and their movements mechanical. On the third night, I was summoned back to the ritual room. Goldwyn was waiting, his expression triumphant. "You have been chosen," he said, his voice reverberating through the room. "You are now one of us, bound to the secrets of the ages." I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed, my body no longer under my control. Goldwyn raised his hands, and the hooded figures began to chant, their voices merging into a single, haunting sound that filled the room. I felt a force pulling me, drawing me into the darkness, and as I looked into Goldwyn's eyes, I saw the truth, a glimpse of a world beyond our own, a realm of shadows and secrets that no human should ever witness. When I finally escaped the mansion, I was no longer the person I had been. I was haunted, my mind fractured, my soul tainted. I tried to return to my life, but the nightmares never stopped, the whispers never faded. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I can still feel Goldwyn's eyes watching me, waiting, reminding me that I am bound to the secrets of the Illuminati forever. The invitation came in the form of a handwritten letter, one I found lying on my office desk late one evening. The envelope was made of heavy, ivory paper, the kind no one uses anymore, sealed with a wax insignia I didn't recognize. Inside, the letter was simple yet haunting, signed only with the words, "For those seeking to uncover the truth." I would have dismissed it as a prank, but the letter contained an offer I couldn't refuse, and all expenses paid weekend at an exclusive mansion in the hills of West Virginia, a place known to house only the elite of the elite. This would be more than a business retreat. It was an opportunity to mingle with some of the most powerful people on the planet, people I could only dream of meeting. So, I brushed off my apprehensions and set out for the weekend, unaware that my life would never be the same. The mansion was massive, surrounded by towering gates that seemed to protect it from the outside world. As I arrived, a dark-clad guard opened the gate, and I felt an unsettling sensation as I drove up the long, winding path lined with statues of ancient figures, their faces twisted in strange expressions. By the time I reached the front doors, the grandeur of the place was clear. It was more a fortress than a home. The butler greeted me, a man whose expression was as still and stern as the statues outside. He guided me through a grand foyer, walls adorned with paintings of historical figures with an unsettling resemblance to many present-day powerful people. Despite the opulence, the house felt cold, like a hollow shell hiding something unspeakable. I was soon joined by a small group of others, each one dressed impeccably and oozing wealth and status. Yet, as we exchanged introductions, I noticed that, like me, many seemed somewhat out of place. We were powerful in our own circles, but nowhere near the status of our hosts. Whispers began to pass through the group, hinting at the presence of influential figures who were still hidden, watching us. They weren't just powerful, they were untouchable. Dinner was a formal affair, with long tables laid with dishes I'd never seen before, delicacies served with vintage wines from estates unknown to me. It felt like an illusion of grandeur, concealing something darker underneath. Our host, a man named Dr. Lawrence Yates, emerged just as dessert was being served. Yates was a quiet legend in our circles, a reclusive figure who wielded influence that extended to the farthest reaches of business and politics. He spoke little, his cold gaze moving between us as if assessing something only he could see. "We are here," he said in a low, silken voice, "to make an offer, an invitation into an inner circle that has shaped history as you know it." His words sent a chill through me, yet no one dared to ask questions. We listened, enraptured, as he laid out the conditions for joining what he called the Alliance, a group known only to the few who were chosen, those willing to pay a price far greater than money. That night, I found it impossible to sleep. The mansion felt alive, creaking and groaning as if something unseen moved through its walls. Around midnight, I decided to take a walk, hoping to clear my head, but as I made my way through the dimly lit hallways, I sensed I wasn't alone. Shadows shifted around corners, and strange symbols adorned the doors, etched into the wood in a language that seemed ancient, unreadable. Drawn by a mix of fear and curiosity, I pushed open a door at the end of the hallway. Inside was a library, but this was unlike any library I had seen. The walls were lined with books older than anything I could have imagined, their spines cracked and worn. On a large, polished table in the center of the room was a single open book. Its pages were covered in symbols that seemed to dance before my eyes, pulling me into a trance. Just as I reached out to touch the book, I heard footsteps. I turned to find Dr. Yates standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Not yet," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. He placed a hand on my shoulder, leading me out of the room. "You are not ready." The following day, Yates summoned us to a private meeting room, his demeanor even colder than before. Tonight, you will have a chance to prove yourselves, he said, his gaze hard and unyielding. We ask for loyalty, obedience, and sacrifice. Those willing to proceed will be rewarded beyond their wildest dreams. Those who hesitate will not leave this place. His words sent a wave of fear through me. The other guests exchanged nervous glances, but no one dared to protest. We were trapped, bound to a fate that had been decided the moment we stepped through the mansion's doors. That evening, we were dressed in black robes and led to an underground chamber illuminated by flickering torches. The room was filled with the same symbols I had seen in the library, etched into the walls and floors. Yates stood at the center, a ceremonial knife in his hand, his expression one of cold determination. Each of us was asked to step forward, to swear allegiance to the Alliance. One by one, we repeated the oath, feeling the weight of each word as it left our lips. When it was my turn, I felt a strange pressure on my chest, as if something was tightening around my heart. I could barely force the words out, my voice trembling with fear. Yates nodded approvingly, then motioned for me to stand beside him. "Tonight, you have proven your loyalty," he said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Now, you must prove your strength." A young man was brought forward, bound and gagged, his eyes wide with terror. Yates handed me the ceremonial knife, his gaze piercing. "This is the final test," he said. "Take his life, and you will be reborn into the ranks of the Alliance." My hands shook as I took the knife, my mind racing. I knew I couldn't do it, couldn't bring myself to take a life, yet I felt trapped, as if the walls were closing in around me. The other members watched in silence, their expressions cold and indifferent. As I stood there, paralyzed with fear, the young man's eyes met mine. In that moment, I saw the desperation, the plea for mercy, and something inside me snapped. I dropped the knife, backing away from Yates, who looked at me with a mixture of disappointment and fury. "You have failed," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "And for that, you will pay the price." Before I could react, two guards seized me, dragging me back through the dimly lit hallways and throwing me into a cell deep within the mansion's underground chambers. The walls were damp and cold, and I could hear faint whispers echoing through the darkness, voices speaking in languages I didn't understand. Days passed in darkness, my mind unraveling as I listened to the whispers, feeling my sanity slip away. I realized I was not the first to be imprisoned here. The walls were scratched with desperate messages, pleas for help, names of those who had been lost to the Alliance. Just when I thought I would lose my mind completely, the door creaked open. Yates stood there, his expression unreadable. "One last chance," he said, his voice softer than before. "Join us, and all will be forgiven." Desperate and broken, I nodded. I didn't have the strength to fight anymore. I was led back to the ritual chamber, where the members awaited, their faces shadowed by the flickering torchlight. As I repeated the oath once more, I felt something inside me give way, a darkness taking root within me. I had become one of them, bound to the secrets of the Alliance, to the darkness that lurked behind their wealth and power. I was released from the mansion the next day, but I was no longer the person I had been. The world felt different, as if a veil had been lifted, revealing the darkness that lay beneath. I could see the symbols everywhere now, in places I had never noticed before. They were on buildings, in advertisements, hidden in plain sight. The whispers never stopped. They followed me everywhere, reminding me of the oath I had taken, the life I had sacrificed. I knew that I could never escape the Alliance, that I was bound to them, to the darkness that had taken hold of my soul. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I feel a presence beside me, a shadow that watches and waits, a reminder of the choice I had made, the price I had paid for power and knowledge that I could never truly understand. It all started with a rumor whispered in the corners of the office. No one knew where it came from, but once the rumor started, it spread like wildfire, leaving an air of mystery in its wake. The story went that our CEO, Thomas Hale, was part of a secret society, one rumored to control the world's fate from behind the scenes. They called themselves the Watchers, and while no one had proof, everyone had a suspicion. It was the way he carried himself, as if he held the world's secrets in his pocket, that kept us all captivated. I had been with Hale Industries for over 5 years, working my way up from an entry-level position to a role close enough to the top that I'd become one of Thomas Hawley's trusted analysts. The work was intense, but I couldn't resist the allure of being in proximity to such power. Even though I laughed off the rumor at first, something inside me was itching to find out if it was true. Curiosity, I suppose, or maybe just a need to see how deep the rabbit hole went. One day, as I was filing through reports in Hawley's office late at night, I stumbled upon a folder buried in his desk drawer. It was marked with a single symbol, an eye within a triangle. The sight of it sent a chill down my spine, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I felt compelled to open it. Inside, there were names, dates, and strange symbols that I didn't recognize. The details were fragmented, but one thing was clear: this was no ordinary business document. Lost in my discovery, I didn't hear Hale enter the room. He found me standing there, holding the folder with a mix of fear and fascination. His eyes, dark and piercing, locked onto mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw something lurking beneath his calm demeanor, a flicker of something ancient, something that went beyond mere human ambition. "You've seen too much," he said, his voice cold and unyielding. "Once you enter our world, there's no turning back." I should have been terrified, but instead, I felt a strange sense of exhilaration. I nodded, and sure of what I was agreeing to, but unable to resist the lure of whatever lay behind those cryptic symbols. From that moment on, I was no longer just an employee. I was an initiate, drawn into a world of shadows and secrets, bound by an unspoken oath to keep the knowledge I would soon possess hidden from the outside world. Hell took me under his wing, revealing bits and pieces of the society known as the Watchers. He called them guardians of truth, but as I learned more, I began to wonder if they were guardians or jailers. My first initiation took place in a hidden chamber beneath the city, an ancient room that smelled of dust and secrets. The walls were lined with symbols similar to the ones I had seen in the folder, symbols that seemed to pulsate with a life of their own. A circle of members, all wearing masks, stood around me, their faces obscured, their eyes watching with an intensity that felt almost predatory. Hale stood at the center, holding a ceremonial dagger. He gestured for me to step forward, his voice carrying an authority that left no room for doubt. "Do you swear to uphold the secrets of the Watchers?" he asked, his eyes fixed on mine. I nodded, my voice barely a whisper, as I replied, "I do." With a swift motion, he pricked my finger with the dagger, letting a single drop of blood fall onto a symbol etched into the floor. The blood seemed to absorb into the stone, as if the very foundation of the room was alive and hungry. "Welcome to the Watchers," he said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You are now one of us." The room erupted in a low chant, the words foreign and ancient, filling the air with a sense of dread and reverence. I felt a strange sensation wash over me, as if I had crossed into a realm where reality and illusion blurred together, where the boundaries of knowledge and power twisted and intermingled. From that night on, my life was no longer my own. I was bound to the Watchers, forced to follow their commands, to partake in their rituals, each one darker and more twisted than the last. At first, it was thrilling, a chance to see the world through a lens few ever would. But as the months wore on, the weight of my choices began to sink in. Harley's demands grew more intense, his influence over me tightening like a noose. I found myself doing things I would have once considered unthinkable, tasks that pushed the boundaries of morality and sanity. I was no longer just an observer. I was a participant, a pawn in a game that spanned centuries. The turning point came during a gathering known only as the Eyes Feast. It was held in a mansion hidden in the mountains, a place so remote that it felt like stepping into another world. The mansion was filled with symbols, mirrors that reflected distorted images, and shadows that seemed to move on their own. The other members wore elaborate masks, their faces hidden, their identities concealed. As the night wore on, I began to feel a sense of unease. The rituals were more intense, the chanting louder, the air thick with an energy that felt dark and malevolent. I could feel the eyes of the masked members on me, watching, waiting, as if testing my loyalty, my resolve. At the center of the room was a pedestal, upon which lay a single artifact, an ancient amulet with the same symbol I had seen in the folder. Hale approached it, his voice reverent as he spoke. "This amulet holds the knowledge of our ancestors," he said, his eyes gleaming with a strange light. "It is the key to understanding our purpose, to unlocking the secrets of the universe." He held the amulet out to me, his gaze intense. "Take it," he commanded. "Embrace the knowledge, the power it offers." I reached out, my hand trembling as I grasped the amulet. The moment my fingers touched it, a wave of energy surged through me, filling my mind with images, visions of places I had never seen, of beings that defied comprehension. It was as if the amulet was alive, a vessel of knowledge that transcended time and space. But with the knowledge came a price. The visions were filled with horror, with scenes of sacrifice, of lives taken in the name of power, of secrets guarded by blood and fear. I could feel the weight of the centuries pressing down on me, the burden of the knowledge I had gained. I tried to pull away, but the amulet seemed to hold me in place, its energy binding me to it, forcing me to see, to understand. The room around me faded, and I was lost in a void, a realm where time and space were meaningless, where the secrets of the universe were laid bare. When I finally broke free, I found myself on the floor, gasping for air, the amulet lying beside me, its glow fading. Hale stood over me, his expression one of satisfaction, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "You are one of us now," he said, his voice cold and final. There is no turning back. The weight of his words settled over me, and I knew that he was right. I had crossed a line, one that could never be uncrossed. I was bound to the Watchers, to the knowledge they held, to the darkness that lurked behind their masks. As the weeks passed, I found myself growing more distant, more disconnected from the world I had once known. The knowledge I had gained haunted me, filling my dreams with visions of shadows and secrets, of eyes that watched from the darkness, of voices that whispered truths I could never speak. I became a ghost, a shadow moving through the world, my every thought consumed by the knowledge I had gained, by the secrets I could never share. I was trapped, bound to the watchers, to a fate I could not escape. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and the shadows grow long, I can feel the eye watching me, waiting, reminding me of the price I have paid for the knowledge I now hold. Working as a private investigator, I had seen it all, or so I thought. Missing persons, cheating spouses, hidden lives, all of it jaded me to the point where nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But when I took on a new client, I had no idea I was about to be pulled into something that went far beyond my understanding, something ancient and terrifying. It all began with a woman named Maria. She walked into my office on a rainy Monday with an expression I couldn't quite read. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, her clothes were pristine, and her eyes held secrets that could rival the darkest mysteries. Maria claimed her husband had gone missing without a trace and that he had been acting strangely in the months leading up to his disappearance. He used to be a different man, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Lately, it's as if he's not there, like he's empty. As she spoke, I felt a strange unease settle over me, a feeling that this was more than just another missing person's case. But Maria insisted I was the only one she could trust. I agreed to take the case, thinking it would be just another day's work. I began by looking into her husband's background, a man named David. He was well-to-do, ran a successful business, and by all accounts, led a decent life. But the deeper I dug, the stranger things became. David had recently been attending gatherings with a group of wealthy, influential people who seemed to shroud their activities in secrecy. There were whispers of a society, one that went beyond wealth and influence, one that delved into the supernatural and the unthinkable. At first, I dismissed these rumors as paranoia, but then I found something that shook me to the core. There was a connection between David's name and a group known only as the Order. It seemed they were a secretive society, claiming origins tracing back centuries, to a time when dark rituals were common, hidden behind the facades of civilization. What disturbed me most were the patterns I noticed. People who associated with this group had a way of disappearing, vanishing into thin air with no explanation. Determined to get answers, I went to Maria with my findings. Her reaction confirmed my suspicions. Instead of fear, I saw resignation in her eyes, as if she had known all along but couldn't bear to face the truth. The Order, she whispered, they aren't just people, they're more. And once they choose you, there's no going back. Despite her fear, Maria decided to help me dig deeper. We went through David's belongings, and in a hidden compartment in his office, we found a journal filled with cryptic writings, symbols I had never seen before. They were disturbing sketches of hooded figures, rituals, and a recurring symbol, a pyramid with an eye at its center. Every page seemed to tell a story of darkness and sacrifice, of power achieved through means that defied human decency. David had been initiated, his journal recounted, into what they called the Veil's Eye, a ceremony designed to sever one's ties to the mortal world, making them one with the Order's mysterious goals. One entry, scrawled in almost frantic handwriting, stood out. They see everything. Every thought, every fear. I'm no longer in control. They've shown me what lies beyond, and it is a horror beyond words. Chills ran down my spine as I read those words. But what Maria and I discovered next turned my fear into a pure nightmare. I had taken a photo of one page and, later that night, I tried to research the symbols and names David had recorded. As I dug into old texts, I stumbled upon stories of secret societies that supposedly wielded occult powers, making pacts with forces beyond our comprehension to gain their power and influence. The more I read, the more David's words felt like warnings left behind by those who had encountered this darkness and failed to escape. One night, I decided to return to David's house alone, determined to find more clues. The house felt eerily silent, as if it held its breath in anticipation. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows as I made my way to the basement. There, behind an old bookshelf, I found what seemed to be a hidden door. It opened to reveal a narrow staircase leading downward, spiraling into darkness. Armed with a flashlight, I descended into what felt like a tomb. The air was thick, heavy, and reeked of something ancient. The walls were covered in more of those disturbing symbols, but this time they were accompanied by phrases in Latin and ancient languages that spoke of ascension, enlightenment, and sacrifice. The chamber was filled with strange relics, candles in the shape of hooded figures, animal bones arranged in intricate patterns, and a podium at the center of the room. On it lay a book, bound in what appeared to be animal skin, with the same symbol, the pyramid Andi, etched onto its cover. As I approached it, I felt a chill down my spine, as though someone, or something, was watching me. I opened the book, its pages filled with incantations and rituals, things I couldn't fully comprehend. But one thing was clear: David had been preparing for something that required not just faith, but utter devotion, a sacrifice of self in a way that twisted my understanding of humanity. Suddenly, I heard footsteps. Someone was coming down the stairs. Heart pounding, I hid behind a stack of crates, holding my breath. I watched as a group of hooded figures entered the chamber, chanting in low voices. They gathered around the podium, hands raised, their voices becoming louder and more intense, filling the air with a palpable dread. As they chanted, I felt something shift in the room, a presence that defied logic or reason. It was as if the walls themselves were alive, pulsating with a dark energy that threatened to consume everything within its grasp. At that moment, I realized that David hadn't just joined a society. He had entered into something far darker, something beyond his control. And now, I was a part of it too. I left the house that night, shaken and terrified, knowing I had unearthed something I could never unsee. The order was real, and they were watching me. The further I dug, the more I saw their influence everywhere. Powerful individuals, corporations, even governments. They had their hands in everything, and their reach was unimaginable. Maria eventually disappeared, just like her husband, leaving me with more questions than answers. But one thing was clear: the order was out there, and they would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. Every night since then, I feel their gaze on me, a silent reminder that some doors should never be opened, and some mysteries are better left unsolved. I still keep David's journal, hidden in a place no one would ever find it, but I dare not read it again. The symbols haunt me, creeping into my dreams, filling them with images of darkness and despair. I live in fear that someday, the order will come for me, and when they do, there will be no escape.